The diner smelled like burnt coffee and regret. It was the kind of place where truckers argued about fuel prices and night shift nurses stared into their phones, too tired to eat. Admiral Marcus Hale sat in the corner booth, civilian clothes doing nothing to hide the way he carried himself. Shoulders back, eyes sharp. 28 years in the Navy, most of them with JSOC, and he could still read a room faster than most people could read a menu. He noticed her immediately. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that worn-down way that comes from working double shifts and raising a kid alone. He noticed her because of the boots, combat boots, tan, scuffed, laced tight beneath her black slacks, the kind issued to aviators. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee, smiling at the regulars, but there was something else. A certain economy of motion. A discipline. Hale watched her for 3 minutes before she reached his table. She didn't meet his eyes right away, just pulled out her pad and waited. He ordered black coffee and eggs, then nodded toward her feet. "Those boots," he said, grinning. "Let me guess. Bought them at some surplus store because they're comfortable, trying to look tough." She looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes were green, tired, and completely unreadable. "Something like that," she said. Her voice was flat, professional, the kind of tone you use when you're done explaining yourself to strangers. Hale chuckled, leaning back. "Hey, no judgment, I see it all the time. People want to feel connected to something bigger, you know, wear the gear, never earn it." She didn't flinch, didn't argue, just wrote down his order and walked away. He watched her go, expecting some kind of reaction, but she gave him nothing. That should have been his first clue. The coffee arrived 4 minutes later. She set it down without a word, turned to leave, and that's when he saw it. The engraving. Faint, scratched into the leather just above the left heel, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. 5 letters, a call sign. Viper. Hale's grin disappeared. His hand froze halfway to the cup. He'd heard that name before, whispered in ready rooms, mentioned in after-action reports. A pilot. A damn good one, and something else. Something that ended badly. He looked up, but she was already gone, moving toward the kitchen with that same quiet efficiency. Hale sat there, staring at his coffee, feeling the weight of his own words settling into his chest like stones. He'd made a lot of assumptions in his life, most of them tactical, a few of them personal. This one felt different. This one felt like a mistake. He glanced toward the kitchen door, then down at his watch. He had a meeting at 0600, but for the first time in years, Admiral Marcus Hale wasn't sure he wanted to leave. The eggs came 10 minutes later, cooked perfectly, and she still wouldn't look at him. Hale ate slowly, watching her move through the diner like a ghost navigating familiar terrain. Every step deliberate, every turn efficient. She cleared tables with the same precision he'd seen in aircrew going through pre-flight checks. Muscle memory. The kind you don't lose even when everything else falls apart. He'd been stationed at Miramar back in '09, back when the Navy was still running mixed squadron trials, pushing women into combat roles while half the brass fought it behind closed doors. He remembered the names that mattered, the ones who proved something. Viper had been one of them. Lieutenant Vera Kincaid, Super Hornet pilot, 3 deployments, 17 confirmed combat sorties over hostile territory. She'd flown close air support in the Hindu Kush, taken ground fire over Helmand, and brought her aircraft home on fumes more times than anyone had a right to. She was good, better than good. She was the kind of pilot other pilots talked about in quiet voices, half admiration, half fear that they'd never measure up. And then she disappeared. Hale couldn't remember the details, just fragments of rumors. Something about a mission gone wrong, an investigation, medical discharge. The Navy had a way of erasing people when it needed to, burying careers under paperwork and non-disclosure agreements until nobody remembered the name anymore. Except he did. He remembered now. Hale pushed his plate away and pulled out his wallet, counting bills he didn't need to count. When she came back to collect the check, he didn't smile, didn't make jokes. He just looked at her, really looked, the way you look at someone when you realize you owe them something you can't repay. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She paused, the empty plate balanced in one hand, her expression unchanged. "For what?" "For being an ass." She almost smiled, almost. "You weren't the first, won't be the last." Hale nodded slowly, then gestured toward her boots. "How long?" She knew what he meant. 6 years since I flew, 7 since I wore the uniform. Why here? She looked around the diner at the peeling wallpaper and the flickering fluorescent lights, then back at him. Because nobody here expects me to be anything I'm not. It was the kind of answer that cut deeper than she probably intended. Hale had spent his entire adult life being exactly what people expected: the warrior, the leader, the man who made impossible decisions and lived with them. He'd never considered what it might feel like to walk away from that, to choose anonymity over identity. He left a $50 bill on a $20 check and stood up. She didn't thank him. Just tucked the money into her apron and started clearing the next table. Hale made it halfway to the door before he stopped, turned around, walked back. She saw him coming, and for the first time something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. "I'm hosting a memorial service," he said, "next month. Naval Air Station Oceana, for pilots we lost in the sandbox. Some KIA, some after, some just lost." He pulled a card from his wallet and set it on the table. "I think you should come." She stared at the card like it was a live grenade. Her hand hovered near it but didn't touch. The embossed lettering caught the overhead light. Admiral Marcus Hale, Naval Special Warfare Command, a phone number, an address, nothing else. "I don't do reunions," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but Hale heard the fracture underneath. The same fracture he'd heard in his own voice when he talked about teammates who didn't come home. "It's not a reunion," he said. "It's a reckoning." She looked up at him then, and he saw it. The thing she'd been hiding behind the tired smiles and the careful movements. Grief. Raw and unprocessed, the kind that doesn't fade with time because you never let yourself feel it in the first place. You just bury it under work and routine and the weight of pretending you're fine. "I can't," she said. Hale didn't argue. He'd made his career knowing when to push and when to wait. He nodded once respectfully and walked toward the door. This time he didn't stop. The diner door chimed as he left, and the night air hit him like cold water. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking back through the window. She was still standing there, staring at the card. Then she picked it up, slipped it into her apron pocket, went back to work. Hale climbed into his truck and sat there, engine off, thinking about the way assumptions shape reality. He'd assumed she was playing dress-up, wearing boots she hadn't earned. But the truth was simpler and harder. She'd earned those boots in ways most people couldn't imagine, and she wore them now not as a costume but as a reminder of who she used to be, of what she'd lost. He started the engine and pulled onto the highway, heading back toward base. But his mind stayed in that diner with a woman who'd flown into hell and come back different, changed. The Navy called it transition, but Hale knew better. There was no transitioning from war. You just learned to live with the ghosts. Question was whether you did it alone or with people who understood. He'd extended the invitation. The rest was up to her. 3 weeks later, Hale was in his office at Oceana when his assistant knocked. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. No appointment." He looked up from the personnel files spread across his desk. "Who?" The assistant hesitated. "She says you know her, wouldn't give a name, just said to tell you Viper's here." Hale felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe, or recognition. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and nodded. "Send her in." The door opened, and Vera Kincaid walked into his office wearing jeans and a faded flight jacket, the same boots, the same quiet discipline, but something was different now. She was standing straighter, meeting his eyes. "I thought about what you said," she told him, "about reckonings." Hale gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "I'm glad you came." She sat down slowly, like someone remembering how to occupy space. "I'm not here for the memorial." "Then why are you here?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the decision forming behind her eyes. The kind of decision that changes everything. "I need to tell someone what really happened," she said, "and I think you're the only person who will actually listen." Hale closed the personnel files and pushed them aside. Whatever meeting he had scheduled next, it could wait. This mattered more. "I'm listening," he said. Vera took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years. "You remember the Hindu Kush mission, October 2017. Close air support for a SEAL team pinned down in a valley. Call sign Redwood." Hale nodded. He'd been stateside during that operation, but he'd read the reports. 4 SEALs wounded. 0 KIA, mission success. The kind of outcome that gets filed away and forgotten because everyone came home. I was flying lead that night, Vera continued. Hornet loaded with precision ordnance. My wingman was Lieutenant Danny Ortiz, call sign Havoc. We were vectored in hot, coordinates transmitted from JTAC on the ground. Enemy fighters dug into the ridgeline. Standard danger close scenario. She paused and Hale saw her hands tighten on the armrests, not trembling, just holding on. The first pass was clean. I put 2 JDAMs on target, eliminated the primary threat, but intel was wrong. There were more fighters in the valley than anyone knew. Havoc took ground fire on his second pass. AAA fire 14.5 millimeter, punched through his port engine. Hale leaned forward. This wasn't in any report he'd seen. He stayed airborne for 3 minutes. Long enough to radio that he was losing hydraulics, long enough to tell me he couldn't make it back to the boat. Her voice didn't break, but it came close. I told him to punch out, eject. Let SAR handle it, but he said something I'll never forget. What? He said, those boys are still taking fire. I've got 1 pass left, I'm taking it. The office felt smaller suddenly. Hale had spent decades in the company of warriors, but stories like this never got easier to hear. They just reminded you what courage actually cost. He made the pass, Vera said. Dropped his last ordnance right on target, cleared the valley, saved the team, and then his hydraulics failed completely. The aircraft rolled inverted at 800 feet. He never had a chance. Hale closed his eyes briefly, honoring the moment. He died a hero. He died following my orders, Vera corrected, and now her voice did break. Just a crack, but enough. I was flight lead. I told him to break off. He ignored me and completed the mission. And when the investigation happened, when they started asking questions about why an experienced pilot disobeyed direct orders, I had to decide. Decide what? Whether to tell the truth and destroy his legacy or stay quiet and carry it myself. Hale understood immediately. The impossible calculus of command, the weight of decisions that have no right answers. You stayed quiet. I told them it was my call, that I authorized the final pass. That Havoc followed orders and died doing his job. She met Hale's eyes and he saw no regret there, just exhaustion. They didn't believe me. They launched a full investigation, interviewed everyone, pulled flight recorder data, analyzed every radio transmission, and in the end they couldn't prove anything either way, so they just buried the whole thing under operational security. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Hale had read enough sanitized reports to know how the machine worked. The Navy protected its image, covered its complications, filed away anything that didn't fit the narrative of precision and control. That's why you left, he said. It wasn't a question. They offered me a promotion, Vera said, and she almost laughed. Can you believe that? Danny's dead, I'm drowning in guilt, and they want to pin oak leaves on my collar and send me to command another squadron, like nothing happened, like it was just acceptable losses. So you walked away. I ran away, she corrected. Took the medical discharge. PTSD diagnosis wasn't even a lie. I couldn't sleep, couldn't fly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his aircraft rolling inverted. Heard him on the radio. 3 words. Viper, I'm sorry. Hale felt the impact of those words in his chest. He apologized for disobeying orders, for making me watch, for leaving me alive. She stood up abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, the flight line stretched toward the horizon, gray tarmac shimmering in the afternoon heat. FA-18s sat in neat rows, their canopies gleaming like the eyes of sleeping predators. I came here because you said it was a reckoning, she continued. Because I've spent 6 years serving coffee and pretending I'm someone else, and I'm tired. I'm so goddamn tired of carrying this alone. Hale stood too, moving to stand beside her, not too close, just present. You want absolution, he said gently. I want someone to understand that Danny Ortiz died making the right choice, and I've spent 6 years being punished for it. Hale looked out at the flight line, at the aircraft that represented everything she'd lost. He thought about the memorial service, about the names he'd be reading aloud. KIA, missing in action, training accidents, suicides. The war killed people in so many ways, and most of them happened after the shooting stopped. I can't give you absolution, he said finally. That's not mine to give, but I can tell you what I know about command. She waited, and he continued. Every leader worth a damn carries ghosts, people they couldn't save, decisions they'd change if they could go back. The difference between a good leader and a bad one isn't whether you make perfect calls, it's whether you care enough to let it hurt. Vera turned to look at him, and her eyes were wet. It hurts every single day. I know. Hale reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. He'd been carrying it since she walked in, somehow knowing this conversation was coming. He handed it to her. That's Danny Ortiz's personnel file, his awards, his evaluations. Everything the Navy officially remembers about him. She took the folder carefully, like it might burn her hands. Why are you showing me this? Because you're right. He died making the right choice, and you've spent 6 years protecting his legacy at the cost of your own. Hale moved back to his desk. I'm putting his name on the memorial wall, full honors, and I'm listing you as the officer who recommended him for valor. Vera's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents she'd never seen, Danny's fitness reports, letters of commendation, a recommendation for the Navy Cross that had been downgraded to a Bronze Star somewhere in the bureaucratic pipeline, and at the bottom a photograph. Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz in dress whites, smiling at the camera with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. They never gave him the Navy Cross, she whispered. Politics, Hale said flatly. The mission was already classified. The investigation created complications. Easier to give him a Bronze Star and move on, but that doesn't change what he did, and it doesn't change what you did. I didn't do anything. You carried his choice. You protected his memory. You took the weight so his family could be proud. Hale sat down, his voice hard now. Certain. That's command, Lieutenant. That's the job nobody tells you about in flight school. Sometimes leading means taking the hit so someone else doesn't have to. Vera closed the folder and held it against her chest. I'm not a lieutenant anymore. That's where you're wrong. Hale pulled another document from his desk, official Navy letterhead. I made some calls after you left the diner, pulled your records. Your discharge was medical, not dishonorable. That means you're eligible for reinstatement if circumstances change. She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Reinstatement. Your PTSD diagnosis was legitimate, but you've had 6 years to heal, 6 years to process. If you wanted to appeal the discharge, demonstrate fitness for duty, you could get back in. I'm 41 years old. I haven't touched a stick in 6 years. Why would the Navy want me back? Hale leaned forward, and his eyes had the intensity that made admirals dangerous. Because we're losing pilots faster than we can train them. Because institutional knowledge matters. Because there's a whole generation of female aviators who need to see what's possible, and because Danny Ortiz died believing you were the best flight lead he ever had. The words hung in the air like ordnance waiting to detonate. Vera sat down slowly, the folder still pressed against her chest. I don't know if I can do this. That's fair, Hale said. But let me tell you what I see. I see a pilot who made impossible decisions under fire, who protected her wingman's legacy at personal cost, who walked away from everything rather than compromise her integrity. That's not weakness, Lieutenant. That's exactly the kind of person I want leading missions. I'm a waitress. You're a warrior serving coffee. He pushed the document across the desk. You don't have to decide today, but at least read it. Come to the memorial, see the names. Remember why you put on the uniform in the first place. Vera picked up the document with her free hand. It was a reinstatement application. Half the field's already filled in, just waiting for her signature. What if I'm not that person anymore? She asked quietly. What if 6 years broke something I can't fix? Hale smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then you'll fit right in. Every pilot I know is carrying something broken. The question isn't whether you're damaged, it's whether you're done fighting. She looked at the application, then at the folder, then out the window at the flight line. Somewhere out there, engines were roaring to life. Aircraft were taxiing toward runways. Pilots were doing the job she used to love more than anything. I'll think about it, she said finally. The memorial service was scheduled for dawn. Hale insisted on that timing, said it was when warriors should be remembered, in that thin space between darkness and light where the world holds its breath. Vera arrived at 05:30. Driving through the gate with a visitor's pass that felt strange in her hands. She'd spent years showing her military ID at checkpoints, the card flashing her rank and her authority. Now she was just another civilian, permitted but not belonging. The memorial wall stood at the edge of the flight line, black granite reflecting the pre-dawn sky. Names were carved into the stone in neat rows, organized by year and squadron. She found Danny's name in the third row from the bottom, Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz, VFA 147, October 2017. Someone had placed a small American flag at the base of the wall below his name. The fabric hung limp in the still air, waiting for the sun. Vera knelt and pressed her fingers against the carved letters. The stone was cold, permanent. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, standing at his grave or his memorial, saying the things she never got to say. But now that she was here, the words wouldn't come. Just silence and the distant sound of aircraft warming up on the flight line. "You're early." She turned. Hale was approaching in his dress whites, ribbons gleaming even in the low light. Behind him, a dozen other officers moved through the memorial area, setting up chairs, arranging flowers, preparing for the ceremony that would happen in an hour. "I wanted to see his name before everyone else got here," Vera said. Hale nodded and stood beside her, looking at the wall. "I added something, hope you don't mind." He pointed to a small brass plaque mounted beside Danny's name. She leaned closer to read it. Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz, USN, Navy Cross. Awarded posthumously for extraordinary heroism in aerial combat. By action of Congress, authorized by Flag Review. October 2021. Vera's throat closed. "How did you?" "I told you I made some calls," Hale said quietly. "Took 4 years, but I got the original recommendation reviewed. New evidence, new testimony, congressional pressure. Sometimes the machine moves if you push hard enough." "New testimony from who?" "From me. I submitted a formal statement describing the tactical situation, the mission parameters, and the decision-making process. I also included testimony from the SEAL team he saved. They've been trying to get him recognized for years. Nobody listened until an admiral started asking questions." Vera couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The Navy Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor. It meant Danny's choice was officially recognized, his sacrifice validated. His family could know the truth. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me," Hale said. "Thank yourself. You kept his memory alive. You protected his legacy when it would have been easier to let him be forgotten. This recognition exists because you refused to let him disappear." The sun was starting to rise now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The flight line came alive with color, shadows retreating, the world remembering how to breathe. Other people began arriving. Officers in dress uniforms. Enlisted personnel. Families. Vera recognized some faces, pilots she'd flown with, maintainers who'd prepped her aircraft. They nodded to her respectfully, some with recognition, others just offering the automatic courtesy you show at funerals. She saw them notice her boots. A few smiled. The ceremony was simple. Hale spoke about service and sacrifice, about the cost of freedom and the debt that could never be fully repaid. He read names from the wall, 37 in total, each one representing a life ended too soon and a family forever changed. When he reached Danny's name, he paused. Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz flew into hell to save his brothers on the ground. He disobeyed direct orders to break off his attack run and instead made a final pass that eliminated enemy fighters and saved 4 American lives. His flight lead tried to protect him by taking responsibility for the decision. But the truth is simpler and harder. Lieutenant Ortiz chose to spend his life purchasing the lives of others, and that choice deserves to be honored. Hale looked directly at Vera. "His flight lead is here today. Lieutenant Vera Kincaid, call sign Viper." She spent 6 years carrying the weight of his choice, believing she failed him. But Danny Ortiz didn't die because of a failure in leadership. He died because he understood what every warrior eventually learns, that some things are worth more than survival. The crowd was silent. Vera felt 200 pairs of eyes on her, but she couldn't look away from Hale. He continued. "Lieutenant Kincaid left the Navy because she thought she didn't deserve to keep flying. I'm here to tell her she was wrong. The Navy needs pilots who understand the weight of command, who care enough to let it hurt, who protect their people even at personal cost." He held up a folder. "This is her reinstatement application. I've reviewed it personally. I've authorized it. The only thing missing is her signature." He looked at Vera again. "If you're ready to come home, Lieutenant, we're ready to have you back." The silence stretched. Vera felt the moment crystallizing around her, becoming something permanent. A choice that would define everything that came after. She thought about Danny's last words. "Viper, I'm sorry." She thought about 6 years of hiding, pretending, serving coffee to people who didn't know who she used to be. She thought about the sky. God, she'd missed the sky. Vera stood up, walked to the front, took the pen Hale offered and signed her name on the application without hesitation. The crowd erupted in applause. Not polite ceremony applause, but genuine, emotional, the kind of response that comes from people who understand what she was choosing, what she was facing. Hale shook her hand formally, then pulled her into a brief, firm embrace. "Welcome home, Lieutenant," he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice, turned to face the memorial wall. Danny's name caught the morning sun, the carved letters throwing tiny shadows. She stood at attention and rendered a salute. Sharp, perfect, the muscle memory returning like it had never left. "I'm sorry it took me so long," she whispered. The flag at the base of his name stirred slightly. A morning breeze moving across the flight line, carrying the smell of jet fuel and possibility. Behind her, the crowd began to disperse. Families moved toward the wall to touch names, to leave flowers, to whisper private goodbyes. Hale stood beside her, waiting. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you report for duty. Medical evaluation. Flight physical, simulator time. If you pass, you'll be assigned to a training squadron. Work your way back to combat status." "How long?" "6 months if you're good, a year if you're rusty." Hale smiled. "Something tells me you'll be good." The flight physical was scheduled for the following Monday, but Vera showed up on Friday asking if they could move it earlier. The flight surgeon, a Navy commander with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, raised an eyebrow but agreed. She spent 4 hours in medical that day. Vision tests, hearing tests, cardiovascular stress tests, psychological evaluation. The psychologist was a woman in her 50s who'd probably evaluated 1,000 pilots returning from deployment or recovering from trauma. She asked gentle questions about sleep patterns, anxiety triggers, intrusive thoughts. Vera answered honestly. Yes, she still had nightmares. Yes, she sometimes heard Danny's voice on the radio. Yes, she'd spent years feeling like she was drowning. But something changed, the psychologist observed. "When? 3 weeks ago, when I stopped pretending I was fine." The psychologist made a note. "That's usually when real healing begins, when we stop performing recovery and start actually doing it." Vera passed the psychological evaluation with a recommendation for quarterly check-ins. The physical evaluation was harder. 6 years of waitressing had kept her fit, but pilot fitness was different. G tolerance, spatial orientation, fine motor control under stress. She spent an afternoon in the simulator, strapped into a cockpit that smelled like disinfectant and old sweat, flying scenarios she'd once executed without thinking. The rust showed immediately. He was slow on the radio calls, hesitant on weapons employment, her hands remembering sequences her brain had forgotten. By the third scenario, she was sweating, frustrated, feeling the weight of 6 lost years pressing down on her shoulders. "You're thinking too much," the instructor pilot said over the intercom. He was watching from the control booth, monitoring her performance on a dozen screens. "Stop trying to remember and just fly." "I don't remember how." "Bullshit. Your hands remember. Your body remembers. Stop getting in your own way." She closed her eyes, took a breath, and let go. Let the muscle memory take over. Let her hands find the controls without conscious thought. The next scenario started. She flew. The evaluation took 3 days. By the end, her performance scores were hovering around 70% of where they'd been 6 years ago. Not great, but good enough. The instructor pilot signed off on her simulator certification with a note that said, "Rusty but recoverable. Recommend refresher training and gradual reintroduction to combat systems." Hale called her into his office the following week. "You passed." Vera felt relief and terror in equal measure. "What's next?" "Next, you report to VFA 203, the training squadron at NAS Oceana. You'll fly with instructors, rebuild your proficiency, get requalified on the Super Hornet. If you perform well, you'll be reassigned to an operational squadron within 6 months. And if I don't perform well," Hale's expression was serious, Then we'll find another way for you to serve, training, logistics, staff work, but I don't think that's going to happen. You have a lot of faith in someone you barely know. I have faith in someone who spent 6 years in exile rather than compromise her integrity, Hale corrected. That's a better indicator of character than any flight evaluation. Vera reported to VFA 203 on a Monday morning that felt like her first day of flight school all over again. The training squadron occupied the oldest hangars on base, where the paint was faded and the air smelled perpetually of hydraulic fluid and sea salt. Vera found the ready room on the second floor, a space lined with metal lockers and survival gear, flight suits hanging like empty skins waiting to be inhabited. The instructor pilot assigned to her case was Commander James Riggs, call sign Professor, a 20-year veteran with gray temples and the kind of calm competence that came from logging 10,000 flight hours. He looked up when she entered, assessed her with a glance, and nodded toward a chair. "Lieutenant Kincaid, heard about you." Vera tensed, waiting for judgment. "Good things, I hope. I heard you were one of the best pilots in your squadron until you weren't." Riggs leaned back in his chair. "I also heard you've been gone 6 years and you're trying to get back to where you were. That's a long fall and a hard climb. I'm ready for it. We'll see." He pulled out a training syllabus and slid it across the desk. 12 phases. Ground school, simulator, basic flight maneuvers, weapons systems, tactical scenarios, carrier qualifications. You pass each phase, you move forward. You fail twice, you're done. Questions. How many pilots wash out? About 30%. Most of them are 22 years old, fresh out of flight school. You're 41, coming back from a 6-year break, carrying trauma most pilots never face. Statistically, you shouldn't make it past phase 4. Vera met his eyes. "I'm not a statistic." Riggs smiled. "Good, neither am I. Let's get started." Phase 1 was ground school, 8 hours a day of classroom instruction covering systems, procedures, emergency protocols. Vera sat in a room with pilots half her age, scribbling notes on subjects she'd once known by heart. The younger pilots treated her with cautious respect, unsure how to relate to someone who was technically a peer, but felt more like a ghost from another era. She studied at night in her small apartment, the one she'd rented just off base. Diagrams of aircraft systems covered her walls, flight manuals stacked on her kitchen table. She fell asleep memorizing emergency procedures and woke up hearing Danny's voice on the radio. Phase 2 was the simulator. Riggs sat beside her in the cockpit, walking her through basic maneuvers, takeoffs, landings, turns, the fundamental grammar of flight. Vera's hands found the controls like greeting old friends, but the language had changed. New systems, new interfaces, new procedures. She adapted slowly, making mistakes that frustrated her, rebuilding competence one flight hour at a time. "You're trying to muscle through it," Riggs observed after a particularly rough session. "You can't force this, you have to let it come back naturally." "I don't have time for natural, I have 6 months." "You have whatever time it takes to do it right. Rushing gets people killed." Vera knew he was right, but knowing and feeling were different countries, and she was still learning the language of patience. Phase 3 was actual flight. A cold morning in November, Vera walked across the tarmac toward an FA-18F Super Hornet that gleamed in the early light. Riggs would fly in the back seat, monitoring, ready to take control if she made a critical error. She climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, began the pre-flight ritual. Switches, gauges, systems checks. Her hands moved through the sequence automatically, and for the first time in 6 years she felt like she was home. The engine start was a controlled explosion of sound and power, the twin turbines spooling up with a roar that Vera felt in her chest. She'd forgotten how alive an aircraft feels, how it trembles and strains against the brakes like a living thing desperate to fly. "How's it feel?" Riggs asked through the intercom. "Like I never left," Vera said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. Tower cleared them for takeoff. Vera advanced the throttles, felt 22,000 pounds of thrust pushing her back into the seat, and released the brakes. The Hornet lunged forward, accelerating down the runway with the kind of authority that makes physics feel personal. She rotated at 140 knots and the wheels left the ground. Suddenly she was flying, climbing, the ground falling away beneath her, the sky opening up in every direction, infinite and blue and hers again. For 10 seconds, Vera forgot about Danny. Forgot about the investigation. Forgot about 6 years of coffee and regret. She was just a pilot doing what pilots do, defying gravity and claiming altitude, making the impossible look routine. "Nice takeoff," Riggs said. "Now let's see if you remember how to land." They flew for 90 minutes. Basic maneuvers, turns, climbs, descents, stalls and recoveries. Vera's skills were rusty but present, buried under years of disuse but not forgotten. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind hesitated. Riggs pushed her gently, testing limits, seeing where the edges were. "Execute a 4G turn to heading 270. Vera banked hard, pulling the stick back, feeling the G-forces compress her body as the aircraft carved through the sky. Her vision narrowed slightly at the edges, the familiar tunnel that comes when blood drains from your brain. She held the turn, rolled level, checked her heading. 270, she confirmed. "Good. Now let's try something harder." For the next hour, Riggs walked her through increasingly complex scenarios, emergency procedures, simulated engine failures, navigation challenges. Vera made mistakes, caught most of them, learned from the ones she didn't. When they finally turned toward home, she was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. The landing was rough. She came in too high, had to correct, floated above the runway longer than she wanted before the wheels touched down hard enough to make Riggs grunt. 3 out of 10, he said as they taxied back to the flight line. "You'll get better." Vera didn't argue. She knew he was right, but the landing didn't matter as much as the fact that she'd flown, actually flown, touched the sky again, remembered why she'd fallen in love with this in the first place. That night she called her daughter. Myra was 9 years old, living with Vera's parents in Virginia Beach while Vera completed training. She'd grown up with a mother who worked nights and weekends, who smiled but rarely laughed, who was present but somehow always absent. "Mom, did you fly today?" Myra's voice was bright with excitement. "I did, baby, first time in 6 years. Was it scary?" "A little, but mostly it was like coming home." "Are you happy now?" The question hit harder than Vera expected. She thought about it honestly, about the rough landing and the mistakes, about Riggs's criticism and the long road ahead, about Danny's name on the memorial wall. "Yeah," she said finally, "I think I am." Phase 4 was Weapons Systems Qualification, which meant learning to think of the aircraft not just as a flying machine, but as a weapons platform capable of delivering precision violence at supersonic speeds. Vera spent weeks in the simulator, mastering systems that hadn't existed when she'd flown operationally. New targeting pods, upgraded radar, data link systems that connected her aircraft to a network of satellites, drones, and ground controllers. It was flying as collaborative warfare, and it required a different kind of thinking. She struggled initially, her brain trying to process information flows that felt overwhelming. But gradually, the chaos resolved into patterns. She learned to filter the noise, prioritize threats, make split-second decisions while flying 500 knots at 200 feet. Riggs watched her progress with something that might have been approval. "You're getting there," he said after she successfully completed a complex close air support scenario. 6 more weeks and you might actually be dangerous again." Vera smiled. "I'm already dangerous, just not in a good way yet." The tactical phase started in January, 6 months after she'd signed the reinstatement papers. Now the training shifted from basic proficiency to combat thinking, dogfighting, surface-to-air threat evasion, multi-aircraft coordination. Vera flew against other pilots, some of them instructors, some of them students like her. She lost more than she won initially, her tactics sound but her execution slow. But she was improving. Every flight, every scenario, she was becoming something closer to what she'd been. The younger pilots started asking her questions. How to manage fear, how to make decisions under pressure, how to carry the weight of responsibility without letting it crush you. She answered honestly, sharing lessons learned the hard way. One evening in the ready room, a young lieutenant named Sarah Chen approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Vera looked up from her flight planning. "You can ask. Whether I answer depends on the question." "I heard about your wingman, about what happened." Chen's voice was quiet, respectful. "How do you fly after something like that?" It was the question Vera had been asking herself for 6 years. She considered lying, offering some comforting platitude, but Chen deserved better. "You don't," Vera said. "Not at first. For a long time you just survive, you go through the motions. You pretend you're okay because that's easier than admitting you're broken. And then one day someone reminds you why you started flying in the first place, and you have to decide if that reason is still strong enough. Is it, for you?" Vera thought about Danny, about Myra, about the feeling of wheels leaving the ground. "Yeah," she said, "it is." By March, Vera was flying operational missions with VFA 203, providing training support for ground units and participating in fleet exercises. She wasn't back to her old proficiency yet, but she was close, 75%, then 80. Riggs started pushing her harder, giving her less instruction, letting her make decisions and live with the consequences. "You're ready for carrier quals," he told her one afternoon. "Carrier qualifications. The ultimate test for naval aviators. Landing a high-performance jet on a moving ship at night, in weather, with nothing but training and courage between you and disaster." Vera stood on the flight deck of the USS Harry S. Truman, watching the organized chaos of carrier operations unfold around her. Aircraft launching from catapults, going from 0 to 150 knots in 2 seconds. Recovery crews preparing to catch planes landing at 140 knots, snagging arresting wires stretched across the deck. The deck was a ballet performed with jet fuel and controlled violence. Riggs stood beside her, wearing a float coat and helmet, shouting over the engine noise. 6 daytime landings, 4 night landings, all graded. You need an average score of 3.0 to qualify. Anything below that, you don't get carrier certified. Vera nodded. She'd done this before, years ago, but carrier quals weren't something you mastered once and kept forever. They were a test you took repeatedly, proving again and again that you could do the hardest thing in aviation. Her first daytime trap was rough. She came in fast, correcting hard at the last second, slamming onto the deck and catching the 3-wire. Not pretty, but safe. Grade 2.5, fair. The second was better. Smooth approach, good lineup, caught the 3-wire again. Grade 3.0, the third was perfect. She flew the ball all the way down, made tiny corrections, kissed the deck gently and caught the 2-wire. Grade 4.0, okay. Riggs gave her a thumbs up from the landing signal officer platform. Now do it at night. Night carrier landings are the most difficult thing in aviation. No horizon, no visual references, just a tiny ball of light showing you where to aim and faith that the math works out. Vera's first night trap was terrifying. She flew the approach on instruments and instinct, seeing nothing but darkness and the faint glow of the ship, trusting the LSO to guide her down. She caught the 4-wire, which meant she came in high, but she was aboard and alive. Grade 2.5. The second night trap was worse. She came in too slow, got a wave off from the LSO, had to go around and try again. Grade 1.0, bolter. By the third night trap, Vera was exhausted, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and fatigue. She flew the approach on pure muscle memory, letting her training take over, and nailed the landing. 3-wire, centered, grade 4.0. "That's how it's done," Riggs said when she climbed out of the cockpit. "You just qualified for carrier operations. Welcome to the fleet, Lieutenant." Vera felt something shift inside her, relief, pride. The knowledge that she'd proven something to herself that nobody else could validate. She was back, really back. In April, she received new orders. Transfer to VFA 195, an operational squadron deploying in 6 months. She would fly combat missions again, for real this time, not training scenarios but actual operations in contested airspace. She called Myra that night. "Baby, I'm getting deployed." There was silence on the other end. Then quietly, "Are you scared?" "A little, but also ready." "Will you come home?" Vera closed her eyes. It was the question every military kid asks, the fear that lives underneath every goodbye. "I'll do everything I can to come home, I promise." "That's what you said before, when you left to be a pilot the first time." "I know, but this time is different." "How?" "Because I know what I'm fighting for now. Before, I was proving something. Now I'm protecting something. That makes me more careful." VFA 195 was headquartered at Naval Air Station Kitsap, a sprawling installation perched on the edge of Puget Sound, where the water was cold and gray. and the mountains rose like sleeping giants in the distance. Vera reported in May, carrying a single duffel bag and the weight of expectations she'd placed on herself. The squadron commander was Captain Sarah Okafor, a Nigerian-American pilot with 1,500 flight hours and a reputation for running the tightest squadron in the fleet. She looked at Vera with eyes that missed nothing and gestured toward a chair. "Lieutenant Kincaid, heard a lot about you. Admiral Hale speaks highly of your capabilities. He also mentioned you've been out of the cockpit for 6 years." "Yes, ma'am. So either you're exceptionally talented or Hale's going soft in his old age." Okafor smiled faintly. "I'm betting on the former, but you'll need to prove it. This isn't a training squadron. We're deploying to the 7th Fleet AOR in 6 months. That means you'll be flying missions over the South China Sea, where Chinese fighters test our resolve daily and mistakes have diplomatic consequences." Vera met her gaze steadily. "I understand, ma'am." "Good. Your call sign is Viper, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. I've seen pilots cling to old call signs like security blankets. Reminders of who they used to be. Is that what it is for you?" Vera considered the question. Once the call sign had represented skill and confidence. Then it became a reminder of loss. Now it was something else, a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. "It's a reminder that I survived," Vera said, "that I'm still here when others aren't, and that I owe them something." Okafor nodded slowly. "That's the right answer. Welcome to the Dambusters, Viper. Don't make me regret taking you." The squadron ready room was a different ecosystem than the training squadron. These were operational pilots, most of them on their second or third deployment, all of them carrying the casual confidence that comes from doing dangerous things routinely. They assessed Vera with professional curiosity. New pilot, older than most, carrying a story they'd probably heard pieces of but didn't fully know. She introduced herself simply. "Lieutenant Vera Kincaid, call sign Viper. I've been out for 6 years, so if I screw something up, tell me directly. I don't need my ego protected. I need to be mission ready." The pilots appreciated that. Honesty was currency in squadrons, worth more than bravado. Over the following weeks, Vera flew with each of them, building trust through shared airspace and clean radio communication. She flew wing for a lieutenant named Marcus Torres, call sign Torch, who flew aggressively but precisely. She flew lead for a lieutenant commander named Amy Patterson, call sign Prophet, who had the best tactical instincts Vera had ever seen. And she flew against Captain Okafor herself, who beat her in a dogfight so thoroughly that Vera had to laugh at her own presumption. "You're good," Okafor said afterward, "but you're thinking like a pilot from 2017. The game's changed. Chinese J-20s are stealth aircraft with beyond visual range missiles. Russian doctrine emphasizes electronic warfare. You can't just outfly people anymore. You have to outthink them." Vera absorbed the lesson, adapted, studied threat assessments and tactical bulletins, learned the new language of modern air combat where information dominance mattered as much as stick skills. By August, the squadron was running full-scale deployment workups,